Okay, welcome to another episode of Panakal Podcast for Geeks, the show about good friends hanging out, talking about things they love. We love.
Yep,
They love.
you got it.
I second guess myself every time. It's so stupid. It's like my thing now. Um, you all know my co-host Andrew Sides, who might jump from this side of the screen to the other side at some point in this conversation.
We shall
And our
see.
guest today is Howard Lyon, who's done. You've done. I looked at your bio earlier in the week. I didn't realize you've done like Star Wars and you've done Dungeons and Dragons. I assumed it was all like personal work and magic.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
new
I've
magic.
been I've been really fortunate to work on a pretty broad range of IPs throughout my career.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I was surprised you had worked in video games for a spell
Yeah,
too.
about 12 years, and it was kind of on accident. I was going to school studying illustration, and one of my teachers worked at a video game company, Don Siegmiller, who I love, probably one of the most influential teachers for me. And he was the art director there, and I kept submitting art tests to try and get a job there, and finally did, and thought I'll just do this while I'm going to school, and ended up in the industry for about 12 years.
Yeah, you were an art director. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's something I just learned.
it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. It was like a 9 out of 10 job. But once I started doing illustration, it was like, oh my gosh, this is 10 out of 10. This is really what I thought I would always be doing.
I
Yeah.
actually have a question about that, but before I get ahead of it, I just wanted to say hi, Howard. Nice to meet you.
Well, nice to meet you too.
Yeah, we just jump ahead.
I passed
Yeah.
each other at some point in a LuxCon or something like that, but I know I've never actually officially met you before.
Great to meet you.
Yeah. But no, I was actually wondering because, yeah, I noticed that in your bio saying like you worked in video games and also it sounded like you were doing illustration around for a spell like at the same time while you were doing your day job within video games and stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, trying to think of the timeline. I started working in video games in like 97. No, I take that back. I started working in video games in like 95 and did that, worked at a company called Sapphire. And in those days in the game industry, when you were an artist, you did concepting and animation and modeling and lighting and texturing and did everything. And some of the early games I worked on GoldenEye for the Game Boy.
Oh, sweet.
I worked on Clay Fighter 63 and a third for the N64, and oh man, so many games when I was at Sapphire. I think I ended up on like 35 or 36 different titles while we were there because the production cycles were just a few months. They didn't have these like 5-year production cycles. And then I left Sapphire when my first child was born, and that was in 97. Which means, and sorry, keep going back to the dates, which means I would have started at Sapphire in 94 because I left there after 3 years. So 94 is when I started in games. My daughter Isabel was born. We moved back home to Arizona, and I joined a company called Cinematics, and we worked on a game called The Revenant for IDOS, and I was art director on that one.
Okay.
And worked on that, and that launched and did okay. Got good reviews, did okay, and started another game for them, and then decided to quit and start my own little game company where we were doing kids educational games. And that one was called Professor Fogg's Workshop, and we did several titles. Disney's magazine, I think it's called Family Fun, if I'm remembering that right.
Yeah.
I think it was like the little like Archie Digest size kind of Family Fun magazine.
I think they did have a small format, and then they had a regular sized as well. But they named it Game of the Year, and it was called Professor Fogg's Workshop, the game that we did, and it was a really great game to work on. And we found out there are a lot of politics in video game publishing
You.
on negotiating for shelf space.
Mm.
And our publisher didn't want to give up shelf space for their internal products. And so once it went through its initial run of games, they didn't print anymore. And it was like, oh my gosh, how does this happen? Like, it's
Right.
sold out and now you're not making any more of them. It was weird. So
Oh,
They
we
didn't
learned
even
hard
and they
lessons.
didn't sell you the rights, obviously.
Yeah, it it was frustrating, and so it just kind of got shelved. And then we made a few more games, and then 9/11 happened, and all like venture capital funding completely disappeared.
yeah.
And so we shut that down, and I went and worked for a company called Realm Interactive, and that was
That sounds
Yeah.
familiar.
Yes, I know Ron.
I
Yeah.
I was like a lead there, and Joe Mad was the creative director,
Mhm.
That's
and we
awesome.
were making a game called Exarch, and it got purchased by NCSoft. And when they purchased the company, they moved everyone to Austin, and I decided to stay in Arizona. I did at that point, while I was working at Realm, is when I started doing work for Paizo Publishing and Dungeons and Dragons, and started building up kind of that freelance aspect of my career. And so when they decided they were going to move, I just jumped ship and went into freelance full time and made that
So,
transition.
how long were you juggling the two? Because like that's something that like I have
Mm,
a day job as an apparel artist, and then on top of that, I have like freelance in a bunch of different industries. The main one right now has been mostly advertising stuff, but I find that to be a constant struggle to be like divvy out time for obviously the day job
yeah,
has a specific set of time. Then there's like, okay, all this other time is like family, freelance, and then if I can manage it, personal work as well.
right. You know,
Yes, I'm always curious to hear like how people navigated that.
it's a great question. So I was doing, I want to say probably 3 years where I was doing work off and on. Um, and I was very fortunate because once I decided to go full time and I let the art directors know that I was working with that, hey, I'm available full time. I can take 10 pieces from you, on this next D&D book or whatever. That they sent work my way.
Okay.
And I did keep doing freelance work for video games. In fact, that's kind of been a constant throughout my career. Like I did concept work for Diablo 4,
Oh,
and
sweet.
I did a lot of pixel art for the Old Republic for BioWare. And I did that over quite a few years. So even once I left video games, I wasn't completely out.
It's still
It's,
always around there, yeah.
yeah, still do things here and there. But I have reached a point, and I feel like it's a very important point in my career, where once I wrap up my current contracts, I'm going to take a couple years and just do personal work. And I've never done that, and I'm really excited to be at that point. I'll have a solo show at the Haven Gallery in New York on
Oh, sweet.
September of 25, and that'll be my second solo show with them. But I'm I've always been working on other things while I've done work for galleries, and this will be a point where all I'm doing is just my personal work for galleries or for sale on my site. So
Yeah, that's surprising. Because I like just the amount of like personal work you've pushed out normally, I've assumed that you would have a lot more time devoted for that as is.
yeah, I wish it was more.
I
Um,
think we all do.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's where I'm headed is doing more of that. And I have a plan, working. I'll be doing a lot of mythological and folklore paintings, fairies and Greek mythology, Norse mythology, and that's always been like the inspiration that's kind of been the foundation for me going into fantasy art. So I'm excited to be able to explore that, looking at doing a book of the art and then of course, Prince and the originals, that sort of thing.
I mean, you've got the base, so I'm sure that'll blow up for you.
Oh, sure.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you'll be fine. Are you gonna write? Are you gonna write a book as well? Is that what you're kind of leaning towards?
so what I'd like to do, and I'm actually talking with, I don't think they'll mind. Well, maybe I better not say their name. I'm
Sure.
talking with an author that's here locally. I will. It's not Brandon Sanderson, so I wouldn't want that to be the speculation because I do a lot of work for Brandon.
Yep.
But an author here locally of collaborating on it, where they write and I'll be doing the paintings for it. But if that doesn't work out, then I do plan on writing it, and it's
Sure.
something that I've thought about for a long time. I think with Greek mythology, there's room for a lot of kind of maybe not alternate or completely different takes on it. But for instance, I did a painting of Medusa, and Medusa is often portrayed in film and in the art as like violent and angry and ready to fight, and this monster, and that's a fun take on her. But she was really a victim in the whole thing. I
Right.
mean, Neptune comes and assaults her, and because of that assault, she can no longer be a priestess in Athena's temple because only virgins are allowed to serve in the temple. Well, Neptune doesn't get punished.
Right.
It's Medusa that does, who was
Oh.
like one of the most, was the like most beautiful woman there was, and she's cursed to be this monster at that point. And so my take on her was to try and represent the sorrow that must have come with that she's been kind of this terrible curse, which is so typical of Greek mythology. The
Yeah,
gods fare well, the mortals are always awful.
yeah. There's a lot of stories where like people just get screwed over just because the gods had a really off day or something.
Right.
They
Yeah.
have an off day often.
They do.
Right.
Yes, they have a very often off day.
Yeah.
No, I think
So
mythology's a good. Everybody likes like mythology, so I think that's a good angle to like. It's
yeah.
harder to like come up with something like 100%. Like even my stuff is based on mythology and it spiraled into its own thing eventually, right? But the early start was all based on like Egyptian mythology and Greek mythology, and then it
Right.
spiraled into the only I started looking into Indian mythology when my cousins were like, "You're Indian and you have zero Indian mythology in here," and I'm just like, "Yeah." And then I started reading more on like Japanese mythology is bananas and scary. I don't know if you've ever read any Japanese mythology. They have
I
like nightmare
have.
fuel in there.
It's
Right.
yeah.
So
It
it's
is
interesting.
amazing. I love the common threads that run through a lot of
Yep.
mythology, and I love the differences in what it kind of reveals about a culture. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Uh, any culture to jump in and see their mythology and their folklore, and that it, our history as humans is so rich. Wherever you go, there's a beautiful, rich history that often is recorded in mythologies. So,
Yep. If you take the time to research it, you'll
right.
it's kind of cool that way.
And it also feels like kind of a common language, right? So when it's like kind of like fan art when you do work in a mythology or a story that people have an awareness of, but mythologies are diverse enough that it's not like you're painting Batman, even though if you paint Hercules, people already may have a connection, or
Right.
Icarus or
Yeah.
whoever it might be, um, that there's kind of that audience there. And that's nice to make that transition. Whereas if you're trying to completely invent a new IP with your art, then it's a little more challenging to find that audience.
That's exactly right. Yeah, because
Yeah, like how hard is that road to hoe, Alan?
it's hard. Well, it's
Yeah,
it's initially, because when I pitched my stuff from the jump, I never said, "Hey, this is based on this type of mythology." I was always like, "This is a sci-fi world I'm working on," and luckily, I have the writer that I work with currently. He's super good at taking my ideas and like bringing them to like better fruition. Like I admittedly am better as an artist than I am as a writer. I'm getting better at writing. It's just not my go-to, right? So this guy, I still work with him. There was two people that helped me on the first book. I had a falling out with one of them, but the current guy I work with is super. He's really good at like understanding what I'm trying to say. I'll send him like paragraphs of stuff, like here's what I'm thinking here. And if it is based on some form of mythology, I'd be like, it's based on this myth. So he is very knowledgeable. He's been writing for like, I don't know, 30, 40 years. So like his knowledge base is like pretty thorough. So if I say it's based on this mythology, he kind of knows it all. Or he has a version of it that he's written for something else. Because he also writes like RPGs and he writes for like board games and stuff like that. So it's like he's very jack of all trades. So, and in turn, sometimes he'll come to me with ideas I didn't know about. Like,
That's cool.
From mythology or from some form of religion. Like we have there's a white elephant in there that's based on who's the elephant from Hindu religion, Ganesh. So there's a female version actually in there as well, which I learned about while researching that religion, right? And I was just like, oh, this is wild. So I was just like, let's use that, right? Let's use that version, which people don't, when they read it initially, don't realize that I've actually got like that god, Hindu goddess, essentially in the book, but she's not playing the part of the Hindu goddess in my book. She's playing the part of like a sort of a mentor to a band of characters called the Sons of Orion. So it's kind of cool. And every once in a while, someone puts the 2 and 2 together. Like I never tell you what it is. Like there's a piece in my first book called Pleiades, portal. It's a portal, but it's actually based on a system in space called the Pleiades cluster, I think. And, there's a lot of stories around that, so it's kind of cool when you meet someone who knows the little Easter eggs you put in, I guess. But there is a little bit of a struggle when you write something off kilter like that, because people are like, do I want to read about this? Maybe, like, and if you tell them, like they always say, what's your inspiration? And I'm always like, I find that if I'm very honest, I just say 80s nostalgia. It's based on like, I grew up in the 80s. I love the cartoons from the 80s. I love the movies from the 80s because they were just like even the 70s, like, Buck Rogers jumping from one spaceship to another while they're traveling through space. You're like, okay, I'm in, Voltron, Thundercats. When you say stuff like that to people, now they're like really interested because you're, like you said earlier, there's something they can connect to and there's something they're interested in, but if you're like, I created this whole new world, it has nothing to do with anything you've ever read, they're like, I'm gonna have to really think about this one,
right?
So you'll feel yourself losing them,
right? You mentioned Voltron. I think about Voltron with surprising frequency, surprising to
That's
myself.
Cool.
Really?
Hang on, I'll show you this cool hat I've got. You can keep talking.
I think whenever I think of sword fights, I think of Voltron quite a bit. Very cool.
My mom thinks this is a religious cross, and I don't have the heart to tell her it's from Voltron.
Oh no, that's what you say. Yeah, it is.
I just nod politely. Yes, Mom. Yes. Yeah. Sword fights. You think Voltron. You think sword fights. You think teams. You think Voltron or Battle of the Planets. Like stuff like that.
And then one of my favorite things as a kid watching Voltron were all the little swarm missiles. Like that, like is stuck
because they go every which way, right?
Like, just total chaos, and they always all hit the target.
Do you remember what that's called? Because it's named after a specific animator in Japan. I think it's called like
it's from like the Macro series, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
I want to say it's called the Ishitani wave or something like it. Basically, it's like it was that animator's like gimmick where he was like, I can draw a bunch of these effects swirling around and make it look really cool. As a result, and it's been just copied
because you expect missiles to just fly straight at the target.
Yeah. Right. Like, whoever that was, like, popularized it immediately. Everyone's just.
The only things that go straight in anime are like laser rifles.
Yeah.
And big cannons. Yeah. Everything else is missiles are always. Hey, we should look that up.
I need to look that up and see what the name is because that has had like a I I don't know why that's brought me so much joy throughout my life.
That's kind of
That's
cool
Fun.
though.
that
It's
kind of
Still fun
effect.
to watch.
It's
no
so cool.
Voltron was one of those. Have you seen the Voltron from Netflix?
Yeah, I have.
I think that's like so. I try to show the original Voltron to my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time, and I had a hard time sitting through the original because I forgot how it's animated. Right, like moving backgrounds, static
Right.
foreground. Right,
Yeah.
in some scenes, and you're just like, oh,
When
oh,
was the original animated in the 70s or
late '70s, early '80s, I think. I don't
Interesting.
remember.
Yeah.
I didn't get to watch that till I was like, I think I was like 5 or 6 when I started watching
Mm.
Voltron. So somewhere in that.
Gotcha.
But then the Netflix one I sat on for a while because I was like, it can't be better than the original. It can't be better than
Well,
the original. I was that
it
guy, right? And
it
it's
it
really
does.
good.
Yeah, I was gonna say it does that thing that I wish a lot more properties that try to remake stuff would do, where instead of it's like a slavish copy, it's more like, oh no, like this is how I remember this thing.
Right.
Right.
And instead just like do their own interpretation on why they remember it being that cool, as opposed to being like, oh, we got to recreate this thing exactly. It's
I
like, well, no,
mean,
no, you don't have to, because maybe the
yeah.
original thing's not as good as you
Well,
remember.
the Netflix one also does like those deep dives where you can like when you know anime is done well when you like feel for the characters,
Hmm.
right? Because
Mm.
they're just characters. But if you are like, oh no, that guy's dead, like I like that
Yeah.
guy. You like now you're like, okay, these guys have done a great job of nailing this down. And I rewatch that frequently because it like with you, Howard, it gives me ideas for anytime I see a ship battle or there's a sequence in one of the episodes where the 5 lions are flying towards a planet and it's just an angled shot and I've been
Mm.
dying to work this into a piece somehow. It just never looks right to me yet. So I'll get there
Cool.
someday. But yeah, lots of inspiration in those old yeah, that's why when people say what are your inspirations? Like 80s nostalgia, man. Like Thundercats was my jam. There's a
Yeah.
I have a character who's a tiger god. I did a piece of his, and some people catch the fact that he's a tiger, but for some reason people think he's a monkey. And I was like,
Oh,
okay,
interesting.
I don't know
Well, the
why.
Oh,
quality of the figure drawing in Thundercats was really spectacular.
Yeah,
Like just really high quality.
there were rumors that they hired like wasn't there a rumor that they hired Japanese animators to do that?
oh no, it was, yeah.
Was it
Yeah, no, it wasn't a rumor like that. Yeah, because like TV animation was,
top
it's like
tier?
how, well, it's how it was today. You farm it out, you board it here,
Yeah.
and then you farm it out to Japan to or overseas to get it produced. I think
Yeah,
Yeah.
nowadays it's like mostly Korea. At the
I
Yeah.
mean
time, it was mostly
Thundercats
Comics
has
were huge in the Philippines. Like so much of comic drawing got farmed out to the Philippines. And I didn't know that until I started looking for outsourcing companies to do concepting for video games. And I met this group of artists that were all from the Philippines that had switched from comics to doing concepting for video games. And it was like, oh, what's your history? And they like pulled out everything. It was they worked on every big comic. It was
that's
incredible.
cool.
no. Here, Alan, I think I've told you this history before, but like, so Thundercats was animated by Topcraft, if I remember right, and Topcraft eventually split and became two
Mm.
separate things. One of them became I forget the actual Disney Japan Animation, which
Sure.
eventually animated Spider-Man, like the animated 90s Spider-Man cartoon and
Yeah.
everything, and a few other things. And then the other half eventually became Studio Ghibli.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
so there's
remember
like
this.
yeah, the or well, actually, wait, sorry, no, I'm trying to remember now. If the Thundercat stuff might have happened after the split, but there was enough like
Sure.
cross pollination between it, and
I
that
mean,
even that carried through to like even the '90s. Like uh the animation studio that animated Thundercats also helped out on Batman animated and also Superman animated, and there is a do you either you remember the crossover episode with Superman and Batman in that show at all? Like I
I
think
mean, I
Joker.
Oh,
remember Batman animated. That show was phenomenal.
So there was like a crossover episode. It was like a 2 or 3 parter where Superman and Batman team up in Metropolis. I think Joker has like a jade kryptonite statue, and he's
Sure.
trying to basically like auction it off to whoever. Howard, there are some amazing action scenes during that, and the reason why is because Studio Ghibli helped out on those, because that same animation studio, at the time, Ghibli was in production on Princess Mononoke, and they were
Oh,
falling
cool.
behind. They said they tapped their old friends and said like, "Hey, can you help us out on this? We'll do a quid pro quo thing. Like, you help us out on this, and then when we have downtime, we'll help you out on whatever projects you have." And this was after the Princess Mononoke stuff, if I remember right. And so then eventually they came knocking and said like, "Hey, we need help on the Superman stuff. We're missing our deadlines. We're not going to make this deadline unless we get some extra manpower to come in." So yeah, no, Studio Ghibli animated like 1.5 episodes of Superman.
That's
Surprise!
interesting.
Yeah.
That's
I
very
mean,
cool.
I just like Thundercats have one of the greatest openings, so
Oh yeah. No, that opening rips.
I don't think
It
anything comes. I mean, there's things that are under it, but I don't think anything's topping it. Like even my kid, like I'll be like, "What cartoon has the best opening?" She's like Thundercats. I'm like, "That's right."
Did you watch Speed Racer?
I love Speed Racer.
Oh,
Yeah.
I only saw parts of it when I was younger. I never
I
actually got.
actually really
Yeah.
enjoyed that movie too. A lot of people hated that live action, but I was like,
Oh, right.
it's not that bad. They're kind of
Well, the animated series, it had a great opening too, and had sometimes some of the action sequences were pretty great on that. Just really ridiculous movement for cars, but
right.
some pretty wonderful scenes in that, or at least that's how I remember it. So I'll keep it that way.
That's the thing, right? Like you're like, this is not like. Don't go back to watch cartoons that you really
Yeah.
really enjoyed as a kid because they don't. Like I used to love this cartoon called Jason the Wheel Warriors, and you can look it up. It's like I don't know what studio made it. There's like an evil plant race, and then there's like what appears to be a human race who rides around these vehicles. I think it's the same studio that made Mask. Remember the transforming cars?
Right.
And I went back to I found a link my friend sent me. I went to watch it and I was like, ooh, this is rough. Shouldn't have done this. So I don't. And then like I used to love watching like now we have Ultraman and he's super popular, but way back when I was a kid there was a character called Spectraman. And I don't know if you remember Spectraman. He was all
Don't.
kind of like brown and gold. And he had like a shark fin on his head. And I've got this piece that Tony Moy did for me, which is he gave him justice. He made him like real strong and like superhero
Cool.
pose because he realized because I was like I wanted that piece from Tony for so long and Tony would never sell it to me, and then he gave it to me for my birthday one year. So I was like, I have it. I can't dig it out right now because it's in a pile of frames. But if you go back and watch the show, you find all these little things that are like, for starters, it doesn't look as good because it's just a Japanese studio, a dude in a suit. It's a very rough suit. He's not exactly cut, so he's like looks like he's in some form of fire suit, and he's fighting giant kaiju. So the concept is he's a dude who's an FBI agent. An alien race gives him this power like rod. Like Ultraman has his chest, right? And he becomes Ultraman. And so it's the same idea, except this guy's got this rod and he holds it out and he becomes Spectraman and he fights these like beings. He fires lasers, he throws ninja stars and shit like that. It's kind of cool. But I went and watched it and there's things in there where like when his alien overseer, his name is Overlord, and when he contacts Overlord, he does kind of borderline a Heil Hitler or a Heil Hitler, and I'm just like,
no.
ooh, like that's not good, But then there's just like goofy. It's just a goofy show because this FBI guy has these ninja stars delivered to the office, right? And they're huge. They're like this big because he's got to throw them when he's bigger,
Oh,
right?
yeah, right.
And his friends are like, "Oh, did you get Spectraman's mail?" And he's like, "Ha ha ha, yes I did." And you're like, "Gig is up, man." Like Ultraman on the other hand, like I know he works for that team, and everybody knows, they're like, "Get Andrew in here. He needs to suit up, right?" And you just like, boop, you become Ultraman. So it's like they kind of avoid those like secret angles with that, but you've also got alien DNA inside you, I think, when you're Ultraman, if I remember correctly. I love watching things with like
There's a few
kaiju and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
I don't know if you watch Ultraman, but that's like I can watch Ultraman all day.
Those Saturday mornings, they had like adventure theater,
Yep.
and it would be like Jason and the Argonauts or Sinbad or
Yep.
Godzilla movies. And man, if there was a big monster destroying a city, I was all in as a kid. Like, it was just fascinating to watch and just
Yeah,
really
those
captured my imagination.
I grew up on a ton of those things, and like I don't have like I have this wanting to put some kind of Gundam mech in my world just to like be like I love this stuff, so here it is. But then my brain is always like, you can't draw that. Just take a minute. Like let's figure this out. Let's do this one step at a time. So like it'll happen. It's gonna happen.
Yeah,
I got
you
this
got to
cool
do it.
idea for
Yeah.
this robot named Xavier. I've got a cool idea for him. But yeah, like Saturday morning cartoons, Saturday morning, like I used to watch Sinbad, I used to watch the Jason Argonauts with my dad all the time. I remember Clash
Yeah.
of the Titans.
Ray Harryhausen, man,
Yeah.
just was another
Dude,
huge influence on me.
the skeletons scared the crap out of me as a kid.
They were
'Cause
terrifying.
that and
And
the
you know what?
centaur with the
I think,
one-eyed
yeah,
centaur.
I think from Sinbad.
Yeah, from Sinbad. The
Yeah.
first time
Yeah.
that thing stepped out, I was like, I'm out. I'm going to the other room, guys. Like
I think they hold up really well. I love stop motion, and I
yeah.
love that kind of jerky movement that you get. And man,
I mean, I still
rewatching
like
Clash
Clash
of
of
the
the
Titans,
Titans.
and
Yeah, that's a classic, man.
it's so good.
I have yet to get around to watching it. I still have it. I have a
The
backlog
original
of
Clash
stuff.
of the Titans?
No. I was
Oh,
gonna say I have a bunch of backlog of stuff I need to
Oh
watch,
yeah,
but something I want to get around to is Mad God by Phil Tippett. I don't know if you've
I don't
watched
know
that
that
at
one.
all.
I'm gonna write it down though.
yeah. What'd you say? Mad God?
Mad God, yeah. So basically, Phil Tippett started this project. I want to say a little bit before Jurassic Park.
Okay.
It was like a personal project he was working on. And then when Jurassic Park had its CG moment, he was like, "Oh well, stop motion's dead. I should just stop." So he put the film away. He pretty much didn't work on it for like decades.
Mm.
And then I want to say maybe like 10 years ago or so, he started to work on it again because he just was like, "I've got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Why not? Like, I'll start working on this." And yeah, his film production company, Tippett Studios, basically said like, "Oh, you've got to finish this. This
It's
looks great."
30 years he worked
Yeah,
on it.
yeah. This is
30
like a
years.
30 year, probably even. Well, actually, no. Wait, how old is Jurassic? Is
Jurassic Park just had their 20th or 30th anniversary, I think.
Yeah, 30 or 35. I want to
Wow.
say something like
Yeah.
that. So
I
yeah,
told you
It looks
I sat down to
wild.
watch all those.
yeah. It's something I've been meaning to watch for a while now, just because it's supposed to be like his magnum opus.
I'll add it to my list.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited to watch that.
I like stop motion. Like what's uh, the animation studio or the stop animation studio that they do all the one with the kids
Like,
fighting the
Oh,
like
Leica,
yeah,
or
those
Leica.
guys. I went to their studio at San Diego because outside of Comic-Con they used to do like a museum, and you get to see some of the like just like 4 months to do like a 2-minute scene. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
you're just like,
unbelievable.
holy crap! Like who? I don't have that kind of patience, man.
If I remember right, their history is like that used to be the old Will Vinton studio, like the California Raisins and everything.
Yes,
Oh
that's
yeah.
yeah, that's exactly who they were. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I was lucky enough to see that museum without waiting in a giant line because I used to help Dave Seeley at his booth. So the year my friend Raina and I were his assistants, Dave's like, "Let's go! I got a cool thing to show you guys," and we got to go. Like, it was kind of cool because we just went right to the front, and everyone's looking at us like, "Ooh, these fucking jokers!" And you're just like, "I am no one of consequence. I just happen to be tagging along with this guy," like
Nice.
so.
I would love to tour that studio at some point. I have a old classmate of mine works over there. I guess like he's their 3D print supervisor because
Oh
a large amount of their stuff is like 3D printed now.
yeah,
Like they'll
Right.
make like, the face shapes and everything 3D printed. Like and they have it now where it's like I think they color it as it gets 3D printed. Like so there's no painting afterwards. It just gets colored as it's and
yeah. A lot of
painted on
stuff that was sitting there
the
was just like gloriously done, and it didn't look
That's
like any
amazing.
paint hit it. So that's like I
yeah.
sent. Did you see the? I dropped so. in our private Discord server, I dropped a video of the Gundam molds being built, and
Oh, I
like
didn't even see that. I missed it.
dude, so like in like the U.S. how you build these molds, right? Like I've been to the Reaper uh warehouse in, I think it's just outside of Dallas, right? And they have these like rubber molds that they pour the pewter into, right, to make the Reaper minis.
Mhm.
But like those have to be changed every X, right? Because they only last for so many hot molds. And they're
Yeah,
showing this, the Gundam ones are like these steel blocks, are so heavy. They have to have these cranes that pick them up and
Mm.
drop them in, and then like it's like compressed in there. It's kind of a I'll drop the video in here for you guys later, but it's a
Yeah, I
really
want to see
cool, like
that.
the dedication to the craft, right? And you just like, and that's what you see with these stop motion studios, the dedication to their craft. Where I'm just like, I I mean, maybe I would find that patience if I was like in love with the process, like when people see like my work, they're like, how do you get all the shapes in here? I'm like, just patience and time. Like
yeah.
Yeah.
there's no other response.
That's pretty much the essence of painting, isn't it?
I mean,
Right.
all the stuff people, so like um I just did my first two magic cards, right? And when I turned in my sketches, I tried to do grayscale, I tried to do hand sketches, and I was kind of stressing myself out because my method of sketching is just color. I just throw I'm like an abstract artist essentially, right? So I just throw shapes down so I see what I want, I pull it apart and keep going. And I was talking to Chris Rahn, he's like, just turn that in. Like, turn in your color. Like, why are you stressing yourself out trying to grayscale something? That's not your process,
Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
when I turned in my sketches, they were like, these are almost done. And I'm just like, yeah. So if you just pick one, like
Right.
I'll go right into details here, like so it's kind of cool that it worked out as once I was and again, once you're in the zone and you're in love with the process of what you do, you're actually having fun. So these guys work for Leica and these studios, they're enjoying themselves. We're looking at it. Some people look at it like, man, you spent 4 months on a 2-minute scene, but that was probably the most enjoyable 4 months for them, right?
Mhm.
Like, so that's
You ever watch Parks and Rec?
dude, I love Parks and
It's been a
Recs.
minute, yeah.
When why is his name? Of course, I bring it up, and then his name's where he's like depressed and out of work, and so he does a stop motion video.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, all right, show it to me. And he's like, I've been working on this for the last 3 weeks. And it's to REM's Stand, the song. And the character like goes, stand, and just stands up. And that's it. It's
That's
like
it. Yeah.
1 second
That's
presentation.
like 5 seconds to
And
foot.
he's like, oh my gosh, I am depressed.
Yeah. It's what's his name? I forgot the name of that character. It's the guy who's all healthy
Adam,
and it's the
No.
dude who's
Ben. It's Ben on this. Ben, right? On
Yeah.
Parks and
oh
Rec?
yeah. He created
Yeah.
that wild board game. That's actually a real board
Yeah.
game, by the way. They made it.
Yeah, the Cones of Dunshire.
Oh,
Cones of
they really
Dunshire.
made it real.
Somebody actually made it. I'm just like, all right.
My gosh.
Kudos
Yeah,
to
that
them,
was a
man.
fun little subplot in that show, The Cones of Dunshire. But that stop motion scene makes me laugh every time. It's so good.
It's like those kind of shows I like because they just got like it's just brilliant writing. Like it's on my top. Like I like one of my all time favorite shows right now is still Schitt's Creek. And if you haven't seen it,
Mm,
take the
Yeah, it's
time to watch it because it brought me
so
levels of joy
funny.
I can't even explain. Like,
So
and it's
funny.
cool because it's like there's only like 4 or 5 sets, right? And it's just good writing. It's a small town. It's
Yeah,
all in this like little town that they built.
right. Great
Yeah,
chemistry with the cast. And you know
yeah,
what I started watching that I resisted for a long time, I just couldn't get into, and then all of a sudden I did, is Bob's Burgers.
dude.
That
Bob's
is
Oh,
Burgers is
yeah.
great.
so funny.
Like
Oh,
Yeah.
every
gosh,
character in there is amazing.
we love it. Yeah, so good.
It's like
So good.
Bob's
That
Burgers
one I
gave.
remember I think I stayed away from it for like a few seasons before I finally it was like same thing as you. Like initially I was like,
Right.
I don't know about this. And then I
No, it's
Yeah.
eventually
good.
just had nothing to do and I watched it. I was like, oh, this is amazing actually.
Yep.
Yeah. Great
That's
writing and the voice acting so good in it.
the
Yeah.
voice acting's great. They have like they edge sometimes on Simpsons style plot lines where you're
Yeah.
like, but they don't overstep it.
Right.
it's not like Homer Simpson go skateboarding over the Grand Canyon, right? They never get to that level. They
Right.
get close
Yeah.
to it, like
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I'm trying
That's
to think.
funny.
It's trying to like trying to find shows that I can like enjoy. Like I watch over and over. It's like I only have like 5 or 6 like that.
Do you are you so I know like some people have different working methods and stuff. Are you a person that has a show or something on the background, or are you one that needs
Hmm.
like silence or music to while you work, or
I like
what is your
audiobooks.
Oh,
Same.
okay.
Yeah. I do put TV shows on sometimes and movies on, but my preference is audiobooks. I listen to sometimes I'll do podcasts and sometimes I'll do college courses that are just out there for free and be like, oh, I want to learn about this, and so I'll put that on. Um, to me, it's one of like amazing perks of being an artist is we
Yeah.
can learn about so many different things while we're working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having a job where I'm like typing emails all day or something because I couldn't do that. I can't listen while
Dude, I
I'm
hate typing
like,
emails to anybody.
yeah, I know.
Like,
It's
I had to
awful.
send an email to another art director early in the week, and I hated every minute of that message. I was just like, ugh. And it was literally like 4 sentences, but I was just like, I don't even want to type this, man. I'm just done with
Yeah,
this.
yeah. I'm
People
I'm
are.
not
It's
good with
interesting
that.
that if you can multitask like that, right? Like a lot of people, there are some artists I know
Yeah,
who can't. They can't listen to anything while they're working because it distracts them.
right.
I usually
Yeah,
watch
I don't
television
know.
shows or listen to podcasts as well, or music. One of
It
those
is
three. So.
I find I can usually carry on a conversation
Yeah,
while I'm drawing, but or while I'm painting, but I do find when I'm sketching, I like it to be pretty mellow. Whatever
yeah,
inputs I have, it's using different parts of the brain or something. But when it's time to paint, I can usually carry on a conversation
yeah.
and listen to things, and it doesn't interfere. It's not a problem, or at least I don't think it does.
I mean, I have to be I have to be in the past this ideation phase
Yeah.
before I can get
Once
on a
it's
call
all
with my
good, it
friends.
can focus.
Then I can jump in a call with my friends and draw and work because I'm like I know what I want and then I know what colors I'm using. Everything's good to go. Um,
Cool.
but yeah, if it's the start, it's like I sometimes I need it to be just quiet. Like when I listen to music, if I'm doing that, I will listen to like I have a playlist of just soundtracks because if I'm listening to words, I'll start singing along, and then that becomes its own thing.
Mm.
So and you can't listen to like anything crazy heavy. So it's like I know my distractions, basically.
What's always weird for me is like audiobooks for some reason I can never listen to.
Mm.
Podcasts have no problem with. For some reason, I don't know if it's because I'm trying to follow along with the narrative in audiobook or something, but
Yeah.
it takes away a little too
Sure.
much of my attention.
I
And
listen to
yeah,
audiobooks better when I'm
I've listened several
driving than I do when I'm working. Like, and I drive to a lot of shows, so
times.
I'm consistently listening to audiobooks. So,
Have you guys read or listened to Worm?
is that what
Have you heard of
that's what that show on Apple TV is based on? Uh
uh
Silo.
this this one is the one I'm thinking of anyways is about superheroes like
Oh,
parahumans.
then no, I don't know this one.
Yeah, I
Worm.
read
I'll
this.
write this
My
down.
my youngest, she introduced it to me. It's like a 1.6 million word book. It's crazy massive. It was written as a web serial. I
Mm,
think the audio of it is like 158 hours to listen
My
to.
God.
And
Jesus.
um, because it was a web serial, the audio was produced by the fan base. And
Mhm.
so some of the readers are really good, some of the readers aren't as good, some have
Oh, it's
better
just
gear
different
than
people
others.
reading it. That's
Yeah,
kind of interesting.
yeah. And but I've really enjoyed it. I recommend it. Check out Worm in
Is
the
it just
parahumans,
spelled normal, like worm
Yeah,
worm?
just WRM.
Okay.
Very cool. Kind of the main character in it has the power to control bugs. And at first it's like, oh, cool. You can grow swarms of bees and, spiders, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But as it goes along, there's a lot of amazing nuance and ideas and creativity, how she utilizes that power.
Sure.
And it's very cool. I've found it quite compelling. It has a huge following online, like a very active fandom.
Okay.
So
That's
I,
cool.
I recommend it. Check it out.
I'll definitely look that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to find my thing with audiobooks, and I had posted about this. Andrew knows this rant, but is finding a good narrator. Like if I
Yeah.
can't listen to the narrator
Yeah.
for like,
No,
so I
I
started
agree with
listening to Mistborn. I
Right.
I can't stand that narrator, and I was like, someone's gonna like this guy's voice. And there's one artist in our group who's like, I like him and I like his wife. I'm like, cool, bro. Like,
Yeah.
I just could not. I gave him 3 chapters or 4 chapters, and I was just like, like I have to like feel the reading, and I couldn't
Yeah.
get with it. I was like, this guy does not care to like give any inflections or different
was-
voices.
Michael Redding and Michael Kramer.
Kramer,
and
yeah.
Kate Redding.
Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. Hey, but he's probably the nice. He's I mean, whatever. He's not my cup of tea, is what I'm saying.
Just
Sure,
his
sure.
delivery just wasn't
Yeah.
for you.
If you
Yeah.
the guy who there's 2 guys who read the Dark Tower series. The first 3 books, the guy was amazing. Unfortunately, he like died in a motorcycle crash, I guess. And then another dude took over for the last 4 books, and he was just as good, not as good as the first guy, but not bad. And so like those kind of narrators I like. Like there's the narrator who's reading I think they call it the Cursed Tome series, like Gideon the Ninth, Harold the Ninth, and all that. That woman is amazing. She does I like narrators who can do the voices well, and can remember what her characters sound like, right? Because like these characters go on for like 3 or 4 books. So like every once in a while you're like, okay, that's cool, I don't know. Kramer I couldn't get behind.
One of the loveliest voices that I've heard for an audiobook is she reads Circe, Madeline Miller's book Circe.
Oh yeah, like Achilles, right? Song of Achilles.
Perdita Weeks, I think is her name. Oh my gosh, she could read anything and I'd just be captivated. She has such a beautiful voice.
Did she read Song of Achilles as well?
Achilles? No, that was a different reader.
Okay. I like that author too. That narrator was good.
Yeah, yeah. To me, so the best for voices that I've ever heard, well, there's 2. It's a tie for me. Jim Dale, who read the Harry Potter audiobooks.
Okay.
Phenomenal voices. And then Nigel Planer reading Discworld books. And he just makes me laugh. Yeah, like his voices are so good. His timing, all of that. The Discworld audiobooks are brilliant. And
I have to look those 2 up.
Yeah.
I've thought about the Potter books.
Have you read the Discworld books?
Yeah, I've read the first.
True.
How many are there? There's like 12, right?
I think there's 42.
Oh god, then I'm definitely not.
Yeah, nope.
Yeah.
I was like, how many are there? 12?
Like a fifth of the way through. I think I'm up to guards. I don't.
That's a great one. That's a great one. I love it. Yeah. It the books aren't super long, and so you
I remember.
can get through them, relatively quick. But those are the audio. There's some great readers on the audio of those. There's some that I don't love as much, but some really great ones.
I've also been really listening to what's his name? Andy Serkis has been reading the Circus, the Lord of the Ring books.
Really?
Yeah,
he's been reading.
He's good.
I had all of those audio before, but I bought all of them with Andy Serkis. So I got Silmarillion, Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings. He is a great reader.
He's a great reader, yeah. And if you have Spotify Premium, it's all there for part of your account. So
really, well, I spent the money on Audible to get all of them.
No, I have them on Audible too. And then one of my friends informed me Spotify Premium has audiobooks, and I was like, what? Not all the audiobooks, because a lot of people would rather work with Audible because they're more well known. So
yeah,
but every X you can find books there. Like the Harry Potter ones are probably there, I'm sure.
That's cool.
But I
have a question.
Go for it.
So I'm guessing I'm oldest of the 3 of us talking. I'm 50, born in 73. What was your first computer? I'm curious, because you talk about the 80s, Alan, but I'm curious what your first computer was that you really remember playing with and working with.
My first computer, like, so my cousins all had like Commodores and all that stuff, or
Nice.
ColecoVision. But my first computer that my dad bought me was an IBM PS1. I got it when I was in high school, mainly because I was like, all my friends are, like, I had to go to the library every time I had to type a report up and stuff. And I had, like, my cousins gave me an old, I don't remember what the model was. It was the old Mac. It was like tiny screen. It was like that big. And
Yeah,
it
the
was like a little,
Mac Classic.
yeah, the little tower. And it
Oh,
printed
Yeah,
to a dot matrix printer, right? And
right.
that, so technically that was my first one. It was free, right? My cousins were like, we're done with this. You can have it. Um,
I
but
have
I I do
IBM
not
such
remember
PS1.
nostalgia
what
for that.
the model
What's that?
was. Oh, sorry.
I didn't hear what
I was
Howard
just
said.
I have such nostalgia for that Mac Classic. Like I did my first like digital art on a Mac Classic.
Oh wow, no! I was literally just trying to type a report on there, and I was just like, I don't like this. What's going on? And then one of my friends got a IBM. Was it SX? Whatever was above the PS1.
A lot of the
DX.
like I don't remember what our first family computer was. The only well, I don't remember the model of it. I remember that it was a Win or it wasn't a Mac, and I also remember that it had the actual floppy disks, like the
Yep,
big the ones that
Yeah.
sound
mine
like
did.
thunder.
Mine had
Shut up.
that. Yep,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't remember what that was, but I remember it was basically all like DOS command line for a while.
yep.
Right.
And was it Windows? Was
I think
Windows
mine
98
had
the
Windows
first Windows,
3.1.
or was that 95 the first GUI that Windows had?
Yeah.
I mean,
It
it was
was
95.
yeah, previous to that it was all DOS. Now some of the programs had a good interface, they had a graphical user interface to them, but yeah, it wasn't until Windows 95. No, I mean Windows
I had Windows
yeah,
3.1 on mine. It was
yeah, Windows
very.
3.1. But
Okay,
It was
you
fine.
started with the prompt, but it did have a UI. It wasn't pure DOS.
Yeah.
one of our computers, I can't remember if it was before 95. It must have been before 95 because I think after 95 was just Windows 98. Um, but one of the times the GUI on it was it, it was so weird. It set up your desktop as a treehouse. And
Huh,
so if you wanted to do certain things, you had to go to different sections of the treehouse to
That's
do it.
that's
interesting.
fun.
It was very weird. And then like if you really wanted to, like you could go to one of the screens, just access the terminal or the command line at that point and then do what you needed to do. But otherwise, like for a lot of like real basic stuff like accessing a word processor or anything like that, like it
Mm,
was just there in this like treehouse graphical user
interesting.
interface, yeah, that you set up.
I still remember with mine, I had to.
Very weird. I remember, like, I want to say, like, a year or two, or maybe like a year after the Jurassic Park had the whole like, oh, it's a Unix system. I know this, and it was the graphical interface they had for that.
Oh,
Right.
really? That's
Yeah.
funny.
So it's like it was very weird. It's like, oh yeah, like people are
Were you
making fun
sitting
of
there
me.
like, you're like,
I
I
have
know
a
this
freaking
system
treehouse
too?
at my house, my computer.
No, that system was the first, because I remember my cousins got me a copy of Doom, and my system kept saying it can't run it. So my cousins taught me how to build a boot disk. So it's like my first like jumping into coding. Because I used to be a UI UX designer before I went and started doing illustration work, and that was like probably the first piece of code I ever wrote was with my cousins that day.
Cool.
And they're like, we're going to teach you how to create a boot disk, and I basically tricked the system into booting as if I had more RAM than I did, and then that allowed Doom to play for 45 minutes at a time before it crashed.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it was pretty fun for me. As a kid, I was just like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just set
I
up a little
remember
timer.
we had a 386. That wasn't the first computer we had, but we had a 386, and I remember when we upgraded from 4 megs of RAM to 8 megs of RAM, what a big
Yeah.
deal it was. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
all the games we could play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
My
never forget.
dad, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'll never forget when we got our like. Do you remember those zip discs
Yeah. I
where
had
they
Oh,
a
were
zip
like
yeah,
disk.
really thick floppy disks? Yeah,
Yeah. I
I
had those
remember
for
when
art
we
I
school.
needed those.
yeah
Yeah.
I remember we got them because I needed like a patch for like a program or a game or something. And at the time we had two computers. One computer that was like hooked up to the internet, that was the bad computer. And then the newer computer was not hooked up to the internet because my dad was like, I don't want this computer to get messed up.
Right.
Um,
Smart.
so I downloaded a patch, and I was like, "This patch is bigger than like what a 3.5 floppy holds." I don't know how to break this up. I'm like 8. What am I supposed to do? And so we ended up. I guess my parents also needed a zip drive for that kind of reason as well. So we ended up getting a zip drive. I was like, I'll never need anything bigger than this.
Right.
This is
Yeah.
nowadays. I think I have like 8 terabytes in my computer.
Right.
Yeah. Zip
Yeah,
disk,
those
man.
iOmega zip disks.
I hated that
Yeah.
thing. I used that in art
Oh,
school for years, and then by the time I was graduating, is when they had the first like optical drives that could burn discs. But
right.
it was like towards the tail end of my graduation. I was just like, "Where the hell have you been for the last 3 years?"
Man.
And
I
then
didn't
jazz
mind.
drives.
I didn't mind the zip disk, but because we had one, if I wanted to switch it between the two computers, this is before like plug and play existed,
Yeah,
so you had to shut down everything. I had to like
right.
crawl behind the computer, plug it into the printer port.
Right. Big old
Yeah.
serial port.
Yeah, and
Yep.
then boot it back up, and it's like, oh gosh, like that was always tedious. I hated
I
that.
mean, I just set up a Bluetooth printer for my dad, and I think I like it just blew his brain out because he was just like, "How is that printing?" I'm like, "Bluetooth." He's like, "But how?" I'm like, "I don't know how to explain Bluetooth to you, man. Like this technology is here and it's right there."
Transporter magic. Same reason,
Yeah,
same way they could send Riker
I
across a
was, I was
planet.
like, it's the same way you're getting Wi-Fi to your cell phone. You know what I mean? It's a radio signal.
Crazy.
Like yeah, I don't think I'd ever step into a transporter, by the way, because that shit's supposed to scramble your molecules. Um, but and we all saw The Fly, right? So you know how that works. Um,
Yeah,
True.
no doubt. That was a rough movie. Oh my gosh.
dude, I
Some
saw that
like
with my
when he
cousins.
peeled off his fingernails,
Oh,
that
Yeah,
like haunted me. Like, oh, they were all like sticky and he just kind of
yep.
like
It's just like,
pulls them off.
ugh, where he vomits on that guy's hand.
Yeah,
I was like, that guy, that's gross. I think one
that
movie
gave
really
me
messed me up was Predator because my cousins were watching Predator, I remember, and I was like, I don't know. I think I was like 8 or 9. And I saw Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I'm like, oh, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I want to watch this. And everyone in the room was like, nah, you're too young. You shouldn't watch this. And I'm just like, whatever. And my dad's like, let him watch it if he wants to. And I was a wreck for like a week because like that thing, like, yeah, the cloaking device, right? So I was like, oh, it could be in any room I walk into.
yeah.
Like that's my brain.
That's
That's where my brain
terrifying.
went. Yeah, it was terrifying because like when we got home, I was just like looking at. I was like staring at my backyard. Now I live in Chicago, so it's like I'm already scared of like gangbangers and all sorts of things, right? And I'm just staring back out my backyard, like it could be standing right there, just staring back at me. You know, I did a lot of dumb things like that. I remember I snuck out of the house to watch Nightmare on Elm Street, and my dad told me
oh
not to
wow.
watch it for good reason, right? But then I had to walk 3 blocks home at night, and the whole time I was like talking to myself, literally just like, "Well, you can't go to sleep because it's gonna kill you in your
Yeah.
sleep, but you can't
Yeah.
stay awake because you're gonna get tired." Like, and my dad knew something was up because I didn't sleep well for like 2 or 3 days, and he's like, "You watched that movie, didn't you?" I was like,
Oh my
"Yeah,"
goodness.
but I never learned my
You know,
lessons, man. I did things like that all day.
movies like, Friday the 13th, Halloween,
Yeah,
uh, Nightmare on Elm Street, they never like they never like s- stayed with me in a scary way so much, but what did is like the Headless Horseman, like Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
sure.
Things where I don't know, it had that like witchy, kind of dark magic kind of element. And whenever like there would be like a windstorm and I'd hear noises outside, my brain was like, it's the Headless Horseman. I know it. The Headless Horseman's like, it's gonna come into the house. And like that was really terrifying. Those definitely stuck with me the most.
That was
So
like I think whenever I had those kind of feelings was the only time I was thankful. Like my mom's very religious. She has all these like like the statues and the crosses,
yeah.
and like we're raised Catholic, so it was the only time I was just like looking at those things like do your job, like keep that shit out there, like don't let it come in here, like because my parents are the kind of like we used to go trick or treating, and I used to take my baby sister with me, and my parents would be like, make sure you come back. Nowadays you can't I wouldn't let my kids go by themselves because they'll never come
Mm,
back. But when in the 80s they were just like, go play outside and come back before dinner, right? Come back before it gets dark. So
right.
for Halloween, they'd be like, come back before it gets dark because the witches come out at night.
Right.
And that shit, I would literally be like walking and I'd be looking at the sky like, yeah, it's getting dark. We gotta go.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. It's witching
I
hour coming
yeah,
up.
it's witching hour. We gotta go. Like, I'd be like, they're coming to get us.
I remember being I think I was desensitized to a lot of like at least in terms of like movie stuff, like a lot of that real early on because I remember when I saw Jurassic Park, I ended up getting like totally absorbed as like, oh, how did they do
Mm.
this? I've
Right.
got, and then like
Oops.
shortly like after they released it to VHS, they also released like the James Earl Jones did a whole documentary on the
Mm-hmm.
making of Jurassic Park and stuff, and it was like the first time I ever saw like any of that in detail, where they're showing like Stan Winston and like all the animatronics and stuff and all that. And around the same time, Universal Studios in Orlando had a show that was a movie magic show, and the whole thing was set up on like, hey, this is how like movie makeup is done and like how animatronics and stuff are done. And their big like set piece on it was they recreated the scene from The Fly, it
Mm.
like in front of like studio audience kind of deal. And I hadn't seen The Fly yet at that point.
Oh, well.
By the time I finally did see The Fly, I think I must have seen that Universal show like 20 or 30 times at this point. And so even though it's still like, oh god, this is like really disgusting, at the same time I was like, oh no, wait, I remember this. I
You're like,
remember
I
them
know how
talking
this
about like, god,
works.
this is like
Right.
all weird like props and stuff. Like this is like crazy.
I
And
mean,
yeah, like a lot of those, like I had a huge like following of like anything that like Stan Winston worked on or anyone that was like
Yeah.
related to him. Like I tried to zero in like constantly when I was younger. It was like that was like my big entry into art, was
It's a
that kind of
good thing
stuff.
to do.
and mine was Star Wars. There was a theater out here in an area called Skokie, and they played all three, and I was 7. So by this time, Return's been out for I think 2 years or something. And
Hmm.
a group of friends like that I grew up with, we all went to the theater. There was like intermissions and lunch breaks and stuff, but we watched all three in one day. It was bananas. And I remember I knew it wasn't real. Obviously, I wasn't like, oh, I want to go live there. But I remember I woke up. In my something like woke up inside me where I was just like, I want to do that. I want to make
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yep.
My dad always tells people like I hadn't convinced to be a doctor until then. Like it just spiraled out of control for him. So,
Yeah,
but
Star Wars was huge influence on
Miss
me. I drew AT-ATs and ATSTs and land speeders were like every other page on my sketchbook was something from Star Wars, it seemed like.
I mean, you can learn a lot from just like not just the movies themselves, but just even like the marketing and branding side of
I was
things,
gonna
right?
ask, did you ever have like the large AT-AT when you were younger and stuff,
Now, my
or?
cousins
It,
did. I didn't have any of that. Cool. I did get the Ewok Village, but it was a hand me down, which is whatever. I took it. Um,
Oh yeah,
the Treetop Village, which later, do you remember the
it
Kevin
became Robin
Costner
Hood's like,
Robin
yeah.
Hood's like forest? I was just like, wait a minute, I've seen this before.
Well, what about you, Howard? Did you ever have that giant playset that they made in like I think early '80s or something like that, or maybe like
I
late '70s?
didn't. So my parents were amazing, but I never had Legos, comic books, action
Oh,
figures, any of that kind of stuff. But I did have computers
Hmm.
and like things to mess around with like that. But they were more of like parents. They bought me like an erector set, so it was like all metal parts and
yeah,
motors to build stuff with. But their biggest thing was like go outside and
Yeah.
play.
yeah.
And so a lot of my youth was getting in trouble, um, blowing things up in our sandbox and like learning how to play with black powder and
Did,
screwing
did you
around
grow up?
like that.
Did you grow up in like suburbia, or did you have a decent like, not like necessarily forest, but like a wilderness to run around in?
So kind of. My parents were both school teachers, and my dad taught at a community college. So he ended up at a community college teaching like calculus and algebra and working in the technology department. Before that, he worked for like JPL and Motorola. He actually invented the radio that NASA used to communicate with the Apollo 11 astronauts.
That's cool.
and has a patent for it. And then he helped write the code for the program that determined the shape of the tiles on the Columbia Space Shuttle, so the first space shuttle.
Oh
So
wow.
he worked on some really cool things while he was contracting for JPL and then Motorola. But anyways, ended up as a school teacher. They built a house at the time way out on the fringe of Mesa, Arizona, out in the East Valley. It was far enough that when you looked to the east from our house, it was all just dirt fields. And that's where I played a lot growing up. But because they built out so far, they were able to get a decent plot. It was like a half acre of land. So not massive, but good sized,
Really
Yeah.
big enough for a yard, a sandbox, a garden, and all of that. And so a lot of my youth was spent in the backyard shooting BB guns and, playing in the sandbox and just had a blast. One of our favorite things to do was we dig a big trench in the sandbox and bury a hose in it and then build like a sandcastle on top of it and put action figures on there. And then we'd turn the hose on and it would like cause the like
Just
castle to
falls.
like slowly just, get destroyed, and imagining the little figures falling off of it. And so it was a great youth. It was great growing
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
But I do kind of wish that I had been exposed to more comic books and in that, because so many of my friends that are fantasy artists, it really shaped them a lot. But no regrets at all. I mean,
Sure.
I love how I grew up, but I don't have a big base in comics.
Yeah, I read a
No,
lot of comic books growing
it
up.
gives you a unique perspective though from the other artists though, as a result.
Yeah,
Sure,
true.
sure. I mean, it was a different, when I do talk about with other artists kind of my age, it was kind of a different experience in this field. But then when I was 10, a friend introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons. And
Oh,
it was like the original, the guy prying the gem out of the statue and that original set. And it captivated me immediately. But I think part of the reason it was so compelling is because so much of my youth was spent imagining the worlds, turning sandboxes into castles and that kind of thing. And so D&D was just an easy step. Like we were immediately fighting for who got to be the dungeon master and making these stories up. And so that was pretty wonderful.
That's fun.
that's
I mean,
awesome.
it sounds fun, man. Like
Yeah,
I didn't really have a lot of friends who were into the same stuff I was into when I was growing up. I was the geeky kid on the block, right? Comic books and
right.
video
Same.
games, and I had one friend who liked video games, so him and I would hang out a lot, but he wasn't into comic books. And I was
Mm,
solo in that territory. My cousins kind of got me into comics because they all were reading comics, but they were also like in high school, about to start college. So
right.
like, and I'm just this little kid just hanging out with them once in a while, right? But once I was old enough to, I would walk to the comic books. When I was a kid, I get a $5 a week allowance, and on $5, I can go to the comic book store, get a comic book.
Yeah,
I'd have money left over to rent a Nintendo game and get candy.
nice.
In the '80s, right? But like
Yeah,
now, it's like barely get one comic book for $5. But I still
right.
remember things like, I used to cut through the park. We lived next to this park to get to the comic book store. I would spend time there, got to know the owners and stuff, so they didn't care if I hung out there reading for a little bit. And then I would cut through the park on the way home and be home by dinner, basically. But I still remember one day I was there too late and I cut through the park at night where it's full of gangbangers, which is a bad idea for me. Um, and I found like the nicest group because they walked me out of the park. They were just like, "You're not supposed to be in here at night. What are you
Yeah, like
doing?"
what are you doing here?
Yeah, and I never did that twice. But I remember that guy. He was like It was my first like foray into like. I was like, "What is this?" It's like a store. It's just full of comic books. I used to go to the local like pantry, right, like the grocery store pantry, and it was owned by this Indian guy, and he had like 5 or 6 comics on the shelf, and I'd be like, "Batman, let's go," One day he started stapling them because he didn't want people reading them.
Oh my God.
Exactly. So I was just like, I can't buy these anymore. And then one of my friends was like, they're opening up a comic book store, blah blah blah. And I'm like, we like were on cloud nine because we didn't have a comic book store for the longest time. You know.
Yeah, that is. I guess that is like back in was that. I guess was that before like direct sales were really that big then because they were still being
Yeah, they were
sold
like
in grocery
slow
stores and
because it was
stuff.
like a risk factor there, right? Like people were like, it's not like opening a bookstore because books would always move, right? To a degree. Comics were it's a dice roll. Like, you got to be in the right area? Like, like if you live like now in Chicago, like if you're like building comic stores in the city, obviously you'll make sales because you have tourists with the people that live there, right? Like this was like a small neighborhood, so it's like you're hoping there were enough. As it turns out, there were enough people there who like comic books. They
Right.
just weren't. They just weren't all hanging out together. We were our own little nerds,
Yeah, a
So
lot of comic books were sold out of like Circle K's, gas stations, corner
yeah,
groceries, that sort of thing.
exactly. Yeah, the
That was
second
like
this guy started stapling them, I told my dad, I'm like, we can't shop here anymore. Like,
I was
They're
gonna say
dead to me.
that it was still probably like mostly perceived as worthless because that was like really before Diamond kind of got their hooks in and made it so comics are kind of what they are now, where they're
Yeah.
you like that like local comic shops only order like the bare minimum
right.
because they can't return any product, whatever
Well,
they
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 also
buy.
know like I literally took my daughter to. I have a friend here, Keith. He's got a store called Keith's Comics, which I've been going to since I was in high school. Now, like he was
Or
like, when my parents moved us from the city to the burbs, I found this guy, and he was one of the first people to initiate the system where he holds the comics you collect. So if you're like, I collect X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, Spawn,
Oh yeah, he
whatever.
gave you like a pull list.
Yeah, he's got a pull list, and once more stores started doing that, then it's a guarantee that like Howard's going to come in and buy these 6 comics. I got to make sure
Yeah,
they're there. Like so you
it's
have a
it's good
list.
it's good
you
for
like
the
Jeff
official comic.
Darrow's comics?
Jeff Darrows.
Yeah.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's been a
Yeah,
minute.
Hard Boiled, Shaolin
Wow.
Samurai, and Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot, I think
Yeah,
that
Rusty the
one.
Boy Robot. Yep.
I love his drawings.
I
Love
like your
his drawings.
throwbacks, man.
Yeah,
He
that
was
was really cool.
great. I know he did concept work on Matrix. I don't know if he did concept
Yeah,
art anywhere else, or if it was just the Matrix, or if he did any other films.
that's all I know of that he
Yeah,
did, but that doesn't mean, you know.
he might. Yeah, he might have done their stuff like Guy Davis has. I think he's completely transitioned out of comic books at this point. He just does concept work for
Mm.
mainly Del Toro stuff, to be honest. And
Comics
then
are
like
really hard to, because comics are
they,
it's a hard industry, man.
yeah,
Like there's this guy, like I like reading. I've been reading Batman, Superman, World's Finest again, and there's an artist. His name is Dan Mora. He's just hitting him out of the park each time.
Yeah.
And I met him at C2E2 briefly, and he is like busy, and I'm just
yeah,
like, I can't draw this fast. This is
it can
insane.
train
Right.
you. Yeah, it gives you such good training, but yeah, just the way the industry's set up, it's really hard to be sustainable
Yeah,
in
that's
just that field.
Agreed.
quick.
Yeah, that was the biggest eye opener for me. Was like, oh, maybe I'll do a comic, and then like seeing how quickly you have to
Yeah.
draw the pages and get through it. I'm like, no.
You do like one or two. I had a friend ask me to do a comic on Andrew Knows the Story. I did, I think, 4 panels, and I was like, I'm out. Like, and that was all in one day in a span of like 6 hours. I was just like, nope, don't want to do this. Like, I knew exactly that I did not want to do that. He's like, really? I'm like, I will draw you one picture if you want, but I am not going to do a comic book.
I remember doing some indie stuff. Like this was like shortly after I got out of college because like I trained in comics, so that was like the one thing I knew initially. I didn't know how to paint or anything. I didn't really know anything about color to speak of. But I knew how to draw it well enough, a little bit. But I remember the thing that eventually broke me from doing comics. Like I never got into anything big. I always ended up just doing like small indie titles and stuff. But I went in on this webcomic with a friend of mine. He was the writer and I was the artist on it. And I had gotten into this routine of like, basically I did like a page start to finish a week. So it was like Monday was penciling, Tuesday and Wednesday was inking, Thursday was coloring and lettering. It would post on Friday. I would rest on Saturday. Sunday would be thumbnailing for the next page.
Oh,
And then
thank
the whole
you.
process would start over.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
You're stressing me out. Just
Yeah, I
saying,
know,
man. It's like,
exactly.
oh no.
That's
did
what I
that
like
for
about our jobs right now, right? Like you're kind of like, to a degree, we can pace ourselves depending on the
well,
project.
I did that for like 3 years, and eventually I was like, I have to
Yeah.
stop because
Oh my god,
like
I'm amazed you lasted that long.
well, I felt like eventually I was like I had to back out because I feel myself picking up very bad like shortcut habits, and I
Mm.
Yeah,
don't know if I can untrain myself from them. And there's
sure.
there's a lot of stuff like I see in my artwork now where I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a holdover from those days where my brain was just like, this has to get done. Whatever we
Yeah,
can do to finish this, man, we got to get it done. But now it's like when I do like the advertising stuff where they're asking like 6 or 12 comps within like 6 hours. It's like, oh, sure. Okay, not a
feel like
problem.
I can do that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
That'd be
very
like not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Um, we're a little over time, so we could do the tail end of the show, which is fine. This happens all the time because
Okay.
we're having good
Yeah.
conversation. I,
we're at this point we shouldn't be overtime. We're just at
we
time.
just keep
Yeah, yeah.
we could literally
Just
keep going for
how it
like
is.
3 hours. We just know
Yeah.
that there's a specific marker on this dumb program, and it just stops. Like we had an episode with Eli, Manaya, and Jason Engel, I think it was, and it was almost 2 hours. And for some reason, in an hour and 30 or an hour and 40 minutes, it just decided we're gonna stop here, even though it. Remember that, and the last half it was just
Hopefully,
gone.
hopefully
Shoot.
now that we're recording, so
I
you
feel
said
like I fixed that issue because I've done the updates and everything, but never.
well, I was gonna say, so we finally did this diverge before we get into the show and tell stuff, but we figured out like I want to say like maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, we figured out that apparently recording MP4 has a high risk of
That's right.
errors or like
Yeah,
Oh,
we
voice if you're using like Streamlabs OBS. So they say to record in dot what is it M4K
it's
or
like
M4Z?
M4V or something.
Yeah,
M4 something like that. We were recording in
apparently
the wrong format for starters. That's what.
that's like a more lossless format. So if there is an error, the way the file structure is within that like particular file, it doesn't freak out as much. It can kind of
Yes.
skip over those
good to know.
errors.
Whenever it hopped, it would like freeze, and so we were the video with who was it?
We had to cut out a whole like 30 second. We had to hunt down like the
Oh, it was
first
Ross
7
Thompson. Yeah,
seconds.
we had to
Yeah,
like take chunks out of this video, and it was so frustrating because you're like,
Oh
what's
yeah.
happening here?
Like just work.
yeah.
Yeah, you just want it to work because it's like, come on, hey, how'd you get a thumbs down to show up on your screen
What?
just now?
Oh, weird.
Let's see.
There it is
Oh,
again.
look at that.
How is it doing that?
I don't know. Maybe I've got like smart gestures turned on or something like that.
I obviously it doesn't do nothing for me.
Hey,
That's so weird. That's so
Howard's
weird.
got the cool Discord. We got the diet version apparently.
reading my
Uh,
mind.
that's cool. Well, who wants to
What
go
else?
first?
Um.
Hey, a balloon went by.
What the? No idea.
I don't know how you're
No
getting to do
idea.
that. This is some wild stuff.
Very bizarre.
Whoa.
That's great.
Cool.
Let's do another 5 minutes of this. Let's just see what happens.
What else?
Like,
What
or
else
like
can this do?
different things.
I don't know.
Oh,
Stick
So
your tongue
this
out.
is like show and tell.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
It's basically like if you got some cool thing you want to tell the audience about, you can show it
do.
off, talk about it.
Yeah,
I
go
mean, you're
grab
doing it
something.
right now, I
I'm set.
think.
Yeah.
yeah, the crazy man.
This crazy thing you're doing.
So strange. I wonder.
I like how he's got to go all the way back to his secret room back there.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder. What I'm wondering. So like mine's another. Well, I finished watching a bunch of movies, and I'll talk about those in a bit.
Okay.
What you got?
So I've
you wanna-
been
Yeah, let's see
go
what
ahead.
you got.
You go first, Howard.
I've been
since you-
wanting to get into like very light blacksmithing.
Cool.
Okay.
And so
Oh,
I started
Yeah.
hammering copper and
Nice.
trying to make, different shapes and things like that with it. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to start by making some ladles. And so I made that one out of all copper, and that's pretty easy. And these are not great. These are not really, these are like my first couple attempts. But this
Sure.
one was made out of steel, and then the copper spoon on there. But that's what I've been doing when I'm like not making art. I've been out in the out in the backyard with like a little anvil and torch and that. And so I just bought a tiny little forge that will let me
Oh, that's
heat
cool.
up the steel enough that I can really start working it. So I
Yeah.
just started
that's
playing
tough.
around with that, and that's been fun.
You gotta make like a
Um,
dagger or something.
Do
Yeah,
you have to heat up the copper a lot to make it workable? Because I know it's a pretty soft metal, isn't it?
it is pretty soft. Copper is different in that you heat it and quench it in water, and that anneals it and makes it very soft. Like this copper, when you anneal it, it you can just like bend it around like it's almost like clay.
Mm.
Um, but then it work tempers, meaning as you hammer it, it gets harder and harder. And so if you get it to a point where you're like, "Ooh, I need it to be soft again," and you quench it, you heat it and quench it and anneal it, you will have to hammer the whole thing again, like pound it all in order to get it all hardened up again. So it works different than steel or iron,
Yeah.
where iron you have to heat it up in order to work it, and then you can quench it in water and oil to harden it, or you can do a low temperature temper of it to change the properties of it. So they kind of work opposite.
That's
Oh,
cool.
that's amazing.
Yeah,
So
it's really fun though.
is copper and steel the main two metals you worked with so far, or have you worked with any others?
So far, copper and steel, and then I tried brass, but brass, depending upon the alloy mix, and I'm learning this along the way. I'm no expert by any means. Um, some are more brittle than others, depending upon the mixture of it. And so the brass that I bought, I can get a bend, but once I start hammering it, it also work hardens, and it becomes too brittle. Like I
Oh,
find
okay.
myself breaking it. Whereas the copper and the steel, you can like work and work and work, reheat it, anneal it, and it's just
Keep
keeps
doing it.
going.
Do you have any desire to start doing like aluminum or anything? Because like I know I forget his name, but the guy that created all the armor for Excalibur and all the like all those armors and everything, and I think
Yeah,
also like Lord of the Rings, he pretty much builds all those suits of armor out of aluminum. Just
Aluminum's
that's
probably
cool.
specifically,
cheaper.
yeah, and it's
Well,
lightweight
It's
compared to like
lightweight,
I
yeah.
or
it
something.
is an interesting thing. I hadn't considered it for what I'm doing now, just because of aluminum for like utensils
Hmm.
maybe isn't quite as as safe as steel or copper.
That's true.
Um, but growing up, I met a guy. His name was Burke Rutherford, and he was friends with my grandparents. And this is kind of a cool aside, a cool story. He was one of the members of the Hells Angels in the early 60s, and like violent and rough life and everything. And he realized he was going to kill him, and he didn't, like something clicked, and he's like, I can't do this anymore. So he went to Mexico and was a beach bum, but really a gifted sculptor. And I use that term very sparingly. He was someone who didn't have any training, but the man could sculpt, and he could take, he just had a real incredible ability to sculpt animals. And so he would sculpt them out of foam, styrofoam, bury them in the sand on the beach, melt down the aluminum cans that he had collected, and cast it on the beach in the sand,
Oh yeah.
and just pour it
Smart.
in, and figured out how to do it. And I have a couple sculptures from him that I inherited from my grandparents that they got from him. But get this, my grandparents, when I said I wanted to be an artist, we went down to Mexico and visited this guy, and I walk in, and there's Frazetta's Death Dealer painting.
Oh,
Really? Like the
Yeah.
sweet.
sorry, the original?
So I guess Frazetta painted him a copy of it. And Frazetta would go down to Mexico to stay with him. He was famous enough in his time that like Picasso came and stayed with him, and
Wow.
Oh, really?
um, Orson Welles stayed with him. He had all these pictures of all these celebrities that he'd been with, a lot of like Laurence Olivier and all of these different characters. So really wild life that the guy lived. But he like I might be off on my dates there. It might have been in the 50s that he moved down to Mexico,
Sure.
but yeah, crazy guy. And
So wild. Yeah.
yeah. So anyways, I've always been intrigued with casting aluminum because of that and seeing what he did, but I understand it can be tricky to work with. It requires a little more expertise to work in aluminum. That might be wrong, but I know there's some outgassing with it that you need to be careful with, and
Know that.
yeah, so, but I'll have to look into it because aluminum is fairly affordable and could be fun to cast with. I personally love how beautiful copper is,
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's
and
gorgeous metal.
it's relatively affordable. For something like this, there's probably, I don't know, $10 of metal there, so not terrible
That's not so
to
bad.
mess around with.
I'm
Yeah.
assuming you're not getting that from like the local hardware store. There's like a metal supplier you're ordering it from directly, I guess.
The copper I'm buying off of Amazon,
Oh,
actually.
really?
Yeah,
Cool.
and
That's so wild.
it comes like I bought some. I bought some to do like smaller spoons because I want to make some like just serving spoons. So these are like little 2-inch discs, and
cool.
those will make a nice little spoon size. And so 10 of these was $24 to
Oh,
get them.
okay.
That's not bad.
And the tools to work with it are pretty like rudimentary. It's a nylon hammer and then a ball peen hammer. And then I just took a log and I sanded out a divot in the log. And that's what you hammer with, like hammer into to shape it.
That's
So
cool.
it's a very like,
Yeah.
I just watched YouTube videos. It's a very affordable hobby to get into and kind of fun to make. As I get better at it, my goal is to like make like Alphonse Mucha style, serving spoons and kind of
That'd be
introduce
cool.
that Art Nouveau aspect to it. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
You'll be serving those at a dinner one day. Everyone's gonna be like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, that's right.
It's a good hobby to get into, man.
Those would be cool.
Fun. It's fun to do something that's still creative, but isn't exactly what I'm doing all day,
Correct. Yeah, totally. It's good to have a
That's
side
like
hobby.
yeah, it's like working for a little bit. Well, I still kind of do it. I just wood's been expensive, so I haven't bought any new ones in a while.
I mean, I've been getting back into building Gundams, but that's because
Ooh.
Josiah has been building Gundams all day and he keeps posting about them, and I'm like, I'm gonna open this box up. And
He
so
made me him
he
and you
made you build
posting
one
about
too.
it. It made
Yeah,
me feel
exactly.
that I've been holding on for like 17 years and just never got
Yeah,
around
I've
to
got like boxes sitting here. I'm not gonna talk about
Wow.
Gundams though. That's not what I'm gonna talk about.
I saw that massive Gundam in Tokyo.
Yeah, you're
Like,
Yes.
so lucky.
it was pretty wild. I guess they're taking it down. Like,
Really?
It's definitely that's like the third or fourth one I think they had up because they've had the original Gundam
Oh,
like
they'll
the
change it up every once in a while, I guess. That's cool.
yeah it's like I think the latest one right now is like a Gundam Unicorn, so they might be taking it down and then putting up a more
maybe a new one. It was
Cool.
so funny. We just like stumbled upon it, and there were tons of people gathered around. We're like, "What's happening?" And they're all, "Oh, the show's about to start." And there was music and smoke and lasers and everything, and like lights turn on, and the Gundam was like, everything fires up, and then like it's back. The like things went like,
Yep.
and then its mouth open, and that was it.
Well, now it
And
like
people
kneels and stuff.
like lost their minds. They were like, "Oh my gosh, that was amazing!" And I was like, "Wait, is that
that's
it?
it.
Is that what we're doing?"
You're like, I want more.
Yeah. So it did kind of make me laugh, but it was cool. I mean, it was really beautifully built, and if there is a nerddom, I support that. Like, I
Yeah.
love when people are passionate about something. I don't care almost about what that is, like I just love that. And that was one of my takeaways from Japan is like there might be someone their whole life is dedicated to making the greatest ink that they
Yeah.
can make. and it might be in their family, and they've pursued it and they're passionate. I love that so much. That's just fascinating and wonderful. So
I'm telling you, man, I'll send you guys that Gundam video. Just watching the process,
cool.
and now not a lot of it is like now they have machines, but there's a degree of like they still have these like specific molds that they have to like. They literally have to use cranes to load them into the machines because they're like heavy
I'm
blocks.
excited
They
to
look
see
like
it.
engine blocks.
Yeah.
The thing I'm going to talk about is I've shown this before. So this is called the Deck of Stories, and if you play D&D, it's basically a pack of cards, and 1985 Games makes it. It's hard to find now, but it has something called the Orc system, which is opening action, rising action, and climatic action. And what you do is you pull 3 cards. You pull an O, an R, and then a C. So then you build your story for your campaign. Well, it's like a side quest essentially. So like the first part says, an immense jungle of ravine blocks your way. A rickety cable car is the only way across. So then you give them next steps. Is the cable car reliable? What is waiting on the other side? Like those are the DM steps, but you tell them the first part, right? And the second part is group of cannibals offers to guide you through the jungle. They have one condition. What is the condition? I don't know. Do they only eat people under special circumstances? So there's that, and then the last part is you find some strange fruit trees. The fruits grant incredible power, but at what cost? Now, these are 3 random pulls I did, and somehow it happened to give me 2 jungle cards, but it could be a mixed bag of whatever, and you can like literally build a small one shot based just on that. What I've been doing is combining this with something else I found. I met these guys at a show at ACD last week. It's called RPG Campfire card deck. So when your party comes to a rest, you literally pull some of these cards, and it's like there's cards for like companions, like what is something small one of your companions did to make your life better? Why did it stick out to you? There's the like a dream card. What object would you like to own someday? There's like the past. So you go like, what is the worst insult you've ever suffered? Your present. What is a pet peeve you can instantly irritate you? And it's basically campfire talk. Now, what I really like too about it is there's this X card that you put down before you start pulling a card. And if you ask a question that somebody in the group is uncomfortable with, they don't have to explain why they don't want to talk about it. They just tap that X card, and you, as a DM, you're like, I'm going to pull a different card. And the group accepts that, right? Like, this person does not want to answer this question for whatever reason. We're going to move past it. But these guys have, like, the campfire guides, and they have some other guides. And I was like, I met the guy who has to sit down and ideate all this. And he was just like, he's got a monster manual thing where you could build, oh man, I want to say it was like 1,000 or 1,200 different monsters. It's cut into 3 subs, like 3 sections. So it's a head, a waist, and the lower. The
I've
upper
seen
torso.
that.
It's insane. He was showing me like this, he was talking about the spreadsheets involved to make sure it made sense, and one thing wasn't overpowered over another thing and stuff. And I was just like, kudos to you, bro. Like, it's not available yet, I guess, but I was like, I would like to buy it because I would have bought it right then and there if he sold me one,
Right.
But yeah, I told him, I was like, I just picked this thing up. This is great, because sometimes when you have the characters sitting around, you're relying on, I guess if you're like an expert D&D player, your group can evolve into their own conversation, right? Man, it was crazy that Beholder we had a fight, right? And they're having this campfire talk. But if you're playing with people who are just kind of getting into D&D, they don't know what to say to each other. They're just like,
yeah, they don't really have a conversation starter.
Yeah, so you need, like, this is like, you got to get them, like, you don't have to be around a campfire. You can just be sitting around a tavern table. But the point is, get the group talking so they get used to each other. You're assuming, oh, this is a group of friends who hang out in the real world. They should be able to just talk to each other. But it's not that easy. Andrew, you've played D&D with me. It's not that easy to get players to, like, just talk. By the way, Andrew builds, I will say this every time I bring up D&D, because Andrew builds some of the goofiest fucking characters I've ever played with, and they're amazing. Like,
well done.
They're straight chaos.
It's been a minute since I played.
I'll set up a campaign for us. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But that's what I got.
And
then Andrew, whatever you got.
Yeah. Well, so for portfolio pieces, I've been developing 3 posters based on the last 3 Planet of the Apes movies.
Good.
And
that's
so
good.
I rewatched those not too long ago to try and just generate some ideas for it. But after doing that, though, I was like, oh, you know what? It's actually been a minute. I kind of want to rewatch the old ones too, just to.
The old ones are
But
rough.
no, okay. I'll say this. This is supremely controversial opinion.
Sure.
And I know for a fact, Alan, you're not going to agree with
You're
me at
about to
all.
say some jacked up shit. I know what you're about to do.
I'm going to say on the whole,
Sure.
there's 10. Wait, hold on. Battle. There's Planet, Beneath,
I'm,
Return, Conquest, Battle, and then the reboot, and then 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there's 10 movies. I haven't not seen one of them. I haven't seen Kingdom yet.
yeah, I
But
haven't seen the last one.
out of the 9 movies I've seen, they have a better hit ratio than Star Wars. I have to say.
Andrew.
Like, okay,
That's not what I
will
expect you to say.
I will say this, right? Like, so this is the caveat. It's like the entirety of the original 5 movie run, that is
Yeah,
all pre Star Wars. Star Wars did
sure,
not exist until I think like 3 years after Battle of Planet of the Apes.
sure.
So Star Wars wasn't in the picture at all to like reshape the whole landscape and be like, hey, this is actually what sci-fi. This is the caliber that sci-fi needs to be judged at now. But if you take them in at the time that they're made, out of the 5, you've got like one that's really not terribly good. It has like some interesting idea, but the overall like execution of it is kind of like whatever. That's the last one, I think. Just because like that one also like you really get the sensation of like the budget is tight on it
Yeah,
kind of deal, because the whole thing takes place in a forest,
you're
which
talking
is
about
like
the last Planet of the Apes
a
one,
battle of the Planet of the Apes, yeah,
right,
where it's
right,
like
right.
this is Caesar has established like the ape society and humans are basically second class citizens.
Yeah,
uh then there's a whole the more there's some very interesting like things they have dropped in there. It's
yeah.
not nearly enough throughout the whole movie. So out of the 5 of those movies, like that one I think is like by far the weakest. The next one after that's like kind of so-so. It's hard to say. It's either Beneath or it's Return to Planet of the Apes. Mainly because like Beneath has some really interesting ideas. I think it's kind of hampered by Charlton Heston being like, I don't want to come back for this. If you have me come
Right.
back, you gotta kill me. So they had like a whole other blonde guy just come in and be like, hey, here's your not Charlton Heston come in.
Right.
He too also got stranded on this planet. And isn't that weird and stuff? Once you get past that conceit, like the rest of the movie works fine. Return to Planet of the Apes, I think, has a really good like back half
Sure.
where it's struggling with these the entirety of like all 5 movies have like very big ideas about like religion, uh class, servitude, um segregation, a lot of like there's a lot of like racism and like charged like racist ideals within it in terms of
Yeah.
like having to grapple these problems and be like, well, wait, like we're treating these beings as like second class citizens, even though like they can't talk or anything. So like, they're animals to us. And it's like, well, but to us, we're like, well, they're just humans. Like that's weird, you know? And even though these apes are all just talking about it, it's like, whatever. And even within the ape society, they have their own like class disparities and even like racial disparities within them, like orangutans and gorillas and chimpanzees and stuff. And they're all like dancing with these ideas. They never like tackle them 100% head on,
Right.
but they hit them on enough that it's like, oh, this is it's weird because you don't see it after Star Wars. You rarely saw that kind of sci-fi. I felt like a lot of the sci-fi tended to veer more towards like spectacle and interesting like plots, but less like weird heady stuff where it's like I don't quite understand what the plot is on this, but there
Right.
you guys are playing with some weird themes on this. Like oh, what's that Sean Connery movie where he's in the G string? I can't remember the name of it.
You're
Yeah.
talking about Burt Reynolds, right? Oh no,
No,
that's
no,
Sean Connery.
it is Sean
Yeah.
Connery.
Yeah, that's called
It starts with a Z.
yeah, yeah.
But like even that one, like if you ever watch that one, weird themes in it, man.
No, I have no interest in
It's
watching
it,
that.
no, it's definitely worth a watch because it's
Sure.
you got to go in with the thing of like, okay, this is not the same sci-fi as like Star Wars or whatever, but going in
Right.
with that, it goes in with like really weird themes. A lot of it, like a lot of that movie grapples like sexuality and stuff, and it is like a lot of that kind of sci-fi from that era where it's like, hey, we got these like weird ideas we're playing around with. We're not going to touch them 100%, but we'll dance around with them enough to leave you kind of wondering like, huh.
What you're like, what the fuck did I just watch? Basically.
Yeah. Well, so like this is like the interesting thing about it was like so the end of like Battle of the Planet of the Apes has this whole because okay, here's the other thing. For a whole franchise that is entirely based on time travel, it's a very successful franchise
Yeah.
considering how difficult time travel is. I want to say like the next successful franchise after that is like Back to the Future, and that had like 3 movies. You know?
Yeah. Planet of the Apes didn't bounce around a lot in time, which
No,
helped
it helped
deal
around.
with like, the issues with time travel. It's like
Right.
now we just moved forward.
That's
But
like,
even when
the Tim Burton one,
oh yeah,
and
so that one bar none is just it's not good.
I don't like it. But the end of it, you're like, I always thought he went to another like universe, another dimension when he went back.
Well,
But
weirdly enough,
apparently Tim Burton says he actually went back to his actual universe,
yes.
but he'd been
So
missing for so long. A version of that main monkey or ape
it it
got to
gets
our Earth.
yeah, it gets really weird. That's also how the original novel works
Yeah.
as well. It has the exact same ending, which is also kind of like I don't understand this, but sure, this is that era
He
of
was
science
purposely
fiction.
leaving it open for another movie, and because like at the end of that, I was like, well, that was dumb.
Yeah, that was the thing. They wanted a sequel. It never went to fruition or anything like that. Great effects from Rick Baker
Yeah, the effects are
and all
great.
that. But yeah, in terms of like, it's a Tim Burton movie and it's from like a not great era of Tim Burton kind of deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the original 5 movies though, like, there's if you watch them all back to back, there's not like a super strong standout one, but there is this interesting theme of like history repeating itself
Sure.
because so like the end of like Battle of the Planet of the Apes, which is the very last one, it is bookended front and back by an orangutan, and I think he's considered like the lawgiver in that one. He's telling the story of like how Caesar formed the ape society, right? At the beginning bookend, you only see him. He's talking to like some apes or whatever. You see him talking to like children apes. So you assume like this is just him recounting the history.
Right.
At the back bookend, though, you find out that it's actually he's talking to like a mixed group of like ape children and human children,
Right.
and because it's like okay, it's implied that like oh, did Caesar change the timeline by realizing like oh no, like we can't go down this route of us subjugating the humans because then we're no better than them, and you can read it one of two ways because the way the movie ends, it ends with a child asking this lawgiver that's telling the story. It's like, oh, like, uh, will we ever run into that kind of thing? And the lawgiver basically gives the answer of like, we always have to be remaining vigilant, and if we're remaining vigilant, we'll never fall into this trap.
Right.
And Caesar has guided us to this. We'll never fall into this as long as we remain true to ourselves and remain vigilant about not fall into these same trappings as the old. And the final shot, however, is a statue of Caesar, and a little tear starts rolling down the face of the statue. And you can read it one of two ways. You can either read it as like, yes, Caesar has broken the timeline, the loop that his parents created by going back in time and stuff. He's altered history permanently. Or you can read it as like he's weeping because this is all doomed to failure again, and it's going to loop back around to the very first Planet of the Apes.
Right.
And this whole thing is just a constant cycle of like Caesar is always going to try and fix things, and it's always going to fail because eventually someone's going to lose their way, and we're going to end up right back at like the first Planet of the Apes eventually.
Mhm.
And just when I take it like that, I was like, yeah, it's actually not that bad of a series.
I haven't
When
seen the
I
originals
took
in
it.
a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
I did watch the new ones because I don't know. I just started watching it. And I was just like, now I got to watch the other three.
Well, the new ones
Yeah.
are really really good. I think those
Yeah.
are fantastic movies from Matt Reeves. But yeah, the original ones, they are a product of their time. They are pre Star Wars sci-fi, so you got to go in with those visors on because it's not going to be on the same level as a Star Wars thing in terms of like spectacle, but in terms of like themes and all that, like it has a lot of interesting ideas. I think it's just
Sure.
kind of hampered by sci-fi, or maybe was not like once Star Wars hit, like you had things like Battle Beyond the Stars, or like everyone like was
Right.
turning up
Everybody
the
wanted
volume.
to do Star Wars. No,
They
I get
wanted
it.
it. Even Star Trek grappled with that with like the motion picture. When Star Wars came out, they freaked out and was like, "Well, what the hell do we do for the Star Trek motion picture? Like this is now old hat."
Right.
Um, but yeah, for its time, I think it had a lot of good ideas and it had a decent hit record for it. You know,
Sure. I agree.
so that is my 2 cents on the Planet of the Apes franchise I just rewatched.
That's
Well,
great.
we are way over time now.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
So
Planet of the
fine.
Apes.
Let's just wrap it up because I don't want to lose any of this cool stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Howard, where can we find information about you if someone's interested in learning more?
You could go to my website, howardlyon.com. It's Lyon, or on most of the social media platforms, I'm Howard Lyon Art.
Howard Lyon Art. And Andrew?
asidesart.com. It's asidesart for all social media stuff. I think at this point it's pretty much Instagram and
Yeah.
occasionally somewhere else as well. I have I've not done a whole lot with it yet, but I do have a free tier now on my Patreon, which is also asidesart on Patreon. I'll start to add stuff to that as well, but it's like I've realized like if people don't want to sign up for a newsletter just because they're tired of having their inbox clogged in, like they can sign up for that. That'll kind of act as like a secondary newsletter as well.
Yep.
Nice.
For people. So I've only just started it, so there's not a whole lot available to free tier, but I'm gonna try and work on that within the next month or so to get that rolling a bit
Cool.
better. And how about you, Alan?
AncientOnes.net or AllenPanakal.com. AllenPanakal Art on all socials except TikTok, as we know. Someone's still squatting on my name there. I don't understand, but it's that. That's the thing. But yeah, thanks for everyone who's been watching. And then our next episode. Yeah, Howard, thanks for taking the time to. You've been on with us for almost 2 hours, so that's kind of cool.
On the chat.
We'll definitely do it again. Our next guest, I think we're gonna try to get Brian Cullen on. He's got a Kickstarter that he's running right now, or it's a backer kit for his third party RPG stuff. So we're gonna try to see if we can do. We might try to do it live just so we can get some of his fan base in there while we're doing it. So we'll see. Cool. I got to talk to him again. But thanks everyone who's watching. And let me take us offline real quick.